Hi, in this video, I'm going to show you how to invoke common GitHub Action workflow from another workflow with using GitHub Action APIs. As you see in this PPT depicts my demo. Here I'm going to explain the complete demo into two parts. In the first part, I'm going to show you how does this solution works with using this design diagram. And in the second part, I'm going to walk you through the code and finally show you how does this GitHub Action works at real time. So before I walk you through the first part of the demo, a kind request, please do subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. So with that note, let's get started with this one, right? So here, I'm going to show you how we can interact two GitHub Action workflows to each other. So basically say that, you have a scenario where you need to run a set of workflows oftenly, right? So in such cases, what you can do is, you can create a dedicated repository, create a template of your GitHub Action workflow, which could be used by multiple other workflows, which is actually needs to run the same steps or the same workflows, right? So this is the scenario which would really suit to that kind of cases. And what is the advantage of this kind of cases is basically you will stop worrying about rewriting those workflows often, scratching your head, wasting so much time, right? So instead of that, you build a template of workflow which could fulfill your need of run, that is workflow run, and that workflow can be called from the other side, from the source workflow side. All right, so basically this is the demo which is going to help you to understand that. Basically here I have given two names to these workflows. One is called a caller workflow, the other one is called as a called workflow. Caller workflow could be n number of caller workflows, but a called workflow could be only one, which is actually called as a common workflow, which contains a set of a common task that need to perform certain job. So all right, so here the workflow will function something like this. Okay, say you have a n number of caller workflows, so which actually need to run certain steps to perform certain job, and that is been templatized in the other repository, and there is a single repository, and let's call it as a called workflow repository, right? So what happens is, you define a workflow in such a way that you would indirectly invoke the called workflows with a set of parameters with using GitHub Action APIs. Okay, so as you are aware, the GitHub Action actually provides a very mature APIs which we could use to invoke our GitHub Actions. And that's what I'm using in this demo as well, right? So for example, the flow is something like this. The developer invokes the GitHub Action workflows, or the GitHub Action itself being scheduled to invoke the workflows basically, or it could be invoked based on the respective events in the GitHub, right? So whenever this caller workflow invokes, this runs a workflow. So in the workflow we define certain steps saying hey, when you run this particular event, when you run this at this particular time, you have to invoke this API. This API is nothing but what? It is actually the API of the called workflow, which is sitting in the other side of the this complete flow, right? And that workflow, let's call it as a called workflow. Why? Because in that GitHub repository we have written a GitHub Action workflows with a set of parameters and the set of jobs and the steps within it, which will actually can be reused by multiple workflows, that is caller workflows. Okay, and that's the reason we call it as a common workflows. Okay, so here how does the transaction is happening is with using the APIs basically, right? And here there could be n number of callers can reuse it. So the advantage here is you are stopping worrying about rewriting those workflows. You are saving the time. You are making it very very uniform one. These are all the use cases of this one, and it is definitely used across the multiple enterprise, I can say. That's all about the brief about this one. Let me quickly walk you through the repositories and the code here, right? So as you see in this screen, this is my GitHub repository, and as you see here, I have created, for this video only, I have created a repository called invoke GitHub Action caller. This repository hosts a workflow, and let me call that workflow as a caller workflow. And underneath this one, it has some Python script which is actually being consumed in this workflow. I'm going to explain that how it is. So this caller file is this caller workflow will actually calls a common GitHub Action workflow called a called workflow, right? So I have created a dedicated repository. So basically these two repositories are sitting in a same organization, but you could also make these repositories sit in a different organizations of GitHub as well. Right? So here I have created a repository called invoke GitHub action called, and this contains nothing but it contains a workflow file, and let's call it as a called workflow, right? So now, so this is what the setting in, this is what the the configurations I have maintained at my GitHub org. It contains two repositories, right? And that's what this diagram mimics actually, right? So this is my GitHub work, this is my one of the GitHub repository which is hosting the caller workflow, this is my another GitHub repository which is hosting the called workflows. Yeah, all right. Now let's see how did I connect these two dots, and how does the caller workflow is actually invoking the called workflow and and reusing the task being defined here, right? So for that case, what I did is I have already cloned my repository called invoke GitHub action caller repository. Yeah, and this is my Visual Studio Code. So in this one, I'm going to quickly walk you through the caller workflow YAML file or the workflow definition. So is the names, I have given the name of my workflow called as a caller workflow, and it has been defined certain workflow dispatches, in the sense it should be invoked manually with the parameter, in the sense whenever you invoke this GitHub action workflow, you have to provide certain parameters, that is inputs, right? That is called workflow name and the called workflow GitHub action account basically. Yeah, and then the called workflow repository name. So basically that's what I have said, this is my org name, this is my repository name, and this is the workflow name. So the workflow name that you could find from the called workflow is this is the name. Don't get confused, I'm in a invoke called GitHub action GitHub repository, and this is called as a called workflow. Those parameters will be fed here by default. These are the by default values, you can change it during invocation. Yeah, all right. And the down the line, I have built the jobs. In the job, it is a build job. Yeah, in the sense build job, in the sense it will get invoked by the build machines. Yeah, all right. So down the line, we have also created which the build has to run, that is which OS the build has to run, that is Ubuntu latest, which is a default run machine, default GitHub action runner machine. Yeah, and then underneath this one we are setting some environmental, because as I said, since we are invoking the the GitHub action file which is sitting in a different repository, we need a permissions on that GitHub repository. So when you say in GitHub you need a permissions, you will get the permissions through the actually the PAT token, that is a personalized access token. So we need to get this personalized access token from your GitHub account. So how do you get that? Let me pause here. So how did I get the GitHub actions the PAT token is, if you go to your profile, you go to the settings. Within the settings, you go to the developer settings here. So there's a developer settings button here. Click on this one, and here you go. There is a personal access token option is there. You could either use the classic or the fine-grained token. So basically, fine-grained is in a beta versions. So I have used a token called PAT token GitHub action. So this has been created. It has a very huge permissions. Maybe you can use it. You can give a very minimum permissions. How to generate? You just click on this one. Click on this one. Yeah. And you have to authenticate it. For now, I don't need to show that. So basically, yeah. So this is how you create a PAT token. You will get a kind of GUID, and that GUID has to be kept as the environmental variable, something like this. I'm going to show you that now. Once you have a token, you go to your caller GitHub action repository. Go to the settings, and here go to the environment. Yeah. Go to the environments. Yeah, you need to go to the variables. Yeah, secrets and variables. Click on this one. Click on actions. Yeah, and here you could create a GitHub action secrets. Okay, click on the repository secrets and provide your PAT token GitHub actions as a secure. Basically, you are storing it as a variable on your repository, which is securely stored on a GitHub repository. Okay, so trust GitHub. It's very secure, so you can store it easily. Yeah. Alright, so that is where this PAT token GitHub action came in picture, and I'm using it in the workflow by referring to that environmental variable. And also I'm also passing some parameters. Okay, so when you say invoking the APIs, you can invoke the the called workflow with a set of parameters, in the sense whatever the parameter you need to pass it to that GitHub called workflow, you can still do that by passing the custom parameters that you need. And that's the reason I have created a custom two parameters, that is parameter 1 and parameter 2. I have fed some random values to this one, so that could be used in the other side. Yeah, and we're going to print these parameters in the called workflow. So that is a difference. Okay, let's see how I can do it. I'm not going to give hard code here and use it, but the parameters will be fed by this API invocation. It will be sent as a payload to this called workflow, and that we see that these parameters been appearing there. And that's the magic. I'm going to show it here. In the steps, we have the checkout steps, and then I'm just installing the Python actually. And in the Python, so since here I'm invoking the GitHub Action APIs with using the Python code. Henceforth, I'm setting the Python environment here. If you see here, I have created a folder called Python script. In that Python script, we are creating a script, and also we are maintaining a requirement.txt file, so that we could install the requirement prerequisite here. Since we are invoking the APIs, we need a request module to be installed in our system or installed in the GitHub Actions. That's what these steps does all about. And then finally, what we are doing is we are triggering the workflows. Is basically where I'm running this script from the GitHub Action machine. How did I do that? I'm just running a Python command and then passing the parameter, passing the file path and with the parameters of the file. Yeah, so these are all the parameters, which is nothing but pointing to a path token. Yeah, and everything is passed here. You could see this. I'm going to share this GitHub Action file repository URL in my video's description. You can find it from there. Let me go to the trigger script. So as the name says, the trigger script is basically the script which actually runs the request APIs to invoke the called workflows. Okay, remember we are still in a caller workflows, in the sense the n number of workflows which could call our called workflows. Yeah, so here we are importing the OS request. Okay, so request has been installed, so we are importing it, and the parameters which has been fed to this script are being captured here, like is a token, owner, repo name, workflow name, parameter. So all these are needed. And here there is a function is been created called as a trigger workflow with a parameter like workflow name and parameter 1 and 2. So I said that we would pass these parameter values to the called workflow. So that is the reason we are being giving here. And in the header, we are preparing a header with the accept and authorizations, header and authorization as the parameters, right? And then we are constructing a data payload as well, because when we hit the APIs, we need the header and the data as well. And in this one, in the data, we have two types of a parameter could be passed. One is the event type. Here is a workflow name is the event type. And then in the client payload, that's where the place where you could pass the parameters to the called workflows. Okay. And all right, so then comes the down. So here is where I'm using the request module and invoking a post method. Okay, remember that we always invoke a post method, and then we are constructing the our APIs. So this is the constant API that you could construct with using this format, that is https api.github.com and the /repos, and the owner is nothing but your org name, and then this is the name of your repository, then /dispatches, in the sense invokes with the JSON equal to data, and the header equal to header values will be passed. Yeah, so basically I'm invoking the APIs twice. I'm going to show that it actually invokes twice, and we also see how it could make it invoke only once as well. I'm going to show that. Okay, so then this is the invocation of my function, which is I have explained you. And in the requirement.txt files, it's just a requirement.txt file. Yeah, it involves a request. Yeah, all right. Now so before I walk you through this one, let me open the called workflows now. So to open that called workflows, I will just called repository. I need to switch the repository. So this is my called workflow. So I'm going to walk you through here as well. So called workflow is, let me go back to the diagram. We have walked you through this called workflow. Now I'm here, that is on the called workflow, and let's see what I'm doing it here. Right. So in this workflow, so basically it contains, so if you see here, this contains no code, nothing. It just hosts a workflow file which could be consumed by multiple callers. Okay, multiple repositories in your organizations. So here the name of my workflow is called workflow. Repositories is, this is the it should be repository dispatch is called workflow dispatch. In the jobs, we have in the jobs we are defining certain. So why, since this is a demo, I'm just mimicking you, just showing you that this workflow will be invoked by the caller, and the parameter will also reach to this particular called workflow. That's what I want to show you. So here it runs on the Ubuntu. This is the parameter 1 and parameter 2 in the steps, right? So we are just checking out the repository, and then we are running a command called echo, because this is a Ubuntu, so you can run a Linux commands here. That is echo is a is a print statement, that is I'm just printing my channel name, that is Cloud Quick Labs, and then running the multiple commands as well in the that is you can call it as a shell commands, yeah, or bash commands, and we are printing certain statements, yeah. All right, so basically, you see, and finally I'm printing the parameter 1 and parameter 2, which has been fed from the caller workflows. So this is all about the called workflows. Okay, so so just now I have walked you through the caller and the called side as well. How are we invoking? Now let's see at the real time how does this works. Okay, so for that case, let me go to the invoke GitHub Actions caller file side, and I will go to the GitHub Actions page. So I click on Actions, and here is a caller workflows. Okay, if I go to the other side, that is a called workflow. So remember, this is a called, and my workflow name is called workflow, right? So last trigger is happened at 30 minutes. Now if I invoke this caller workflow, we should see two workflow being invoked. Why two? Because because in the caller side I'm invoking the API twice, and that is what I have said you earlier. So if I go to the caller side and go to the trigger file, so I'm invoking the request post twice. So we should have a two workflow been invoking in the simultaneously. Now let me switch back to the caller. I'm going to run this workflow now. So if I can click on a run workflow, so here you go, right? So basically it is asking for the parameters. How does it asking? So that is where the magic is happening here. If you go to this workflow, so here we are telling hey, invoke this workflow on dispatch. It should provide the inputs. So these are the inputs being passed with the description being appearing on this one. So in the sense, you see the descriptions are being appearing here, and you can click on a run workflows, right? So basically I'm just invoking so I'm a developer node, so I'm invoking my workflow, which actually internally consumes the card workflows. Okay, so let's see how does it invokes. So if you see here, it has started to run because I manually run it. And if I open this one, it should be very quick because we are not running any heavy lifting here. So it actually installed the Python, triggers the workflow. So you see the Python has been installed, triggers the workflow, so which is, I think it has happened, right? And then here is the post Python, yeah. And then if I go to the run this one, so basically it looks like it has triggered. Now let's go to the called side. So I'm just switching my tabs, and if I refresh it, I should see two workflow. Here you go, two workflows are already been run, right? So earlier the last runtime was at 32 minutes ago. Now you see the two workflows, that is 1313 has run already. If I open the one of the so one of the workflow, and if you go to the so the checkout, so this is where the repository has been checked out, and then you see the one line command. So it says it has already run. So what is the one line run is all about? It's actually we are running a echo command, that is Cloud Quick Labs, and the output is been shown here. And what about the multi-line script, where actually I'm passing where actually we are printing the variables. And if I open the multi-line script, here you go, right? So if I open this one, so we are echoing the add another script, blah blah, and finally we are echoing the parameter 1 and parameter 2. So if I go here, so you see we are printing the parameter 1 and parameter 2. Now that is a magic, right? So how does this parameter 1 and 2 reach to this called workflow? And that happened through the invoke APIs. Yeah, so I have invoked the API of GitHub Action workflow from the caller workflow, and the parameter reached here. Okay, so this way you can try to reuse your workflows, which has been hosted on a dedicated repository, and the caller can the many callers, n number of callers can use that workflows. Okay, and finally I promised to show you that it invokes only one time, right? So for that case, what I do is I go here, I remove this because I don't want that, because I want my code to invoke my workflow only one time. I do that. I just update this here, so just commit it. Let me commit it. So this is the last step that I'm going to show you, and that's the wind of my demo. All right, so it looks like the code is been merged. So I will go to the caller actions, yes, and go to the actions here. Yeah, so if I go to actions and let me re-trigger it. So to trigger that, please follow the here. So I'm just clicking on the run workflow. I'm keeping the default parameter as it is because that's what I need. And when I click on the workflows, I think it has currently invoking it. And earlier we saw two workflows being invoked from the call side. Now we should see only one. That's the aim of the show now. All right, so right now you see the 2 minutes ago, and hope that it invokes. So here you go, it has invoked, and that's what here you see, right? So earlier it was 2, now it is only 1. Earlier it was 2 minutes ago. Now you see only 1 is been invoking, right? So this way you can regulate the number of invoke that you can do to the called GitHub Actions. Okay. All right. So let me show you the final multi-line input as well, and the multi-line. So you see the parameters have been printed here. All right. So with that note, I have successfully shown you the things need to be shown in this video. Finally, a kind request, please do subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. So with that note, thank you. Thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.